Oh, we're not good at this, are we? I thought there was going to be more than that. I thought there was going to be...
That's staying in the
podcast. Okay, no, you got to explain what we're doing here first. Like, you can't just go right into it. No, you gotta explain like what we're actually doing on the podcast. Like, it's our first episode. You can't just go right into it.
I thought that's what the description was going to be for. Well, I don't know what to say. Like,
just explain like what we're doing. We're comparing two roller coasters. Blah 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 blah.
Okay. And we're here today to compare two different coasters. That's what we'll be doing in every episode. And Gabe will pick one, I'll pick one, and we'll just compare them. And at the end of the episode, we'll each pick which one we think is better. We don't necessarily have to agree. He might pick mine, I might pick his. We might agree and each pick the same one, but it'll be a toss-up. And for our first episodes here, we're gonna do our top 15 coasters.
And this is our top 15 as of basically today. There's a couple of roller coasters that I have ridden now that won't be even included or considered for this. And then your trip to Hershey Park is not being included, correct?
Definitely not, because that would change my list drastically, because I rode my number one coaster there. So that is before that.
Yes. So we're going to say, as of basically July of 2023, that's when we made our top 15s. And that's where we're going to be at here for this list. So... other than that, it's going to be interesting, and we don't care if the coasters are like the same manufacturer or the same model or anything. And the goal of this too, I would think, is to compare, roller coasters that you wouldn't necessarily compare to each other. Would you agree with that?
That is a very good point, because so our episode today is a wooden versus steel. We have two very different coasters, and on top of that, I'm cheating a little bit because I'm technically doing two. Because it's a dueling coaster. So.
Well, you can't include one without the other, so you have to kind of have both of them there.
Especially the coaster that I'm doing today is they're very much entwined. This is Sam.
And I'm Gabe.
And this is Coaster Wars.
In the red corner, standing at a height of 125 feet, reaching speeds of nearly 60 miles per hour, hailing from the tourist-ridden lands of Orlando, Florida, and the B&M Gym, it is the Dueling Dragons! In the blue corner, standing at a height of 136 feet, also reaching a top speed of 60 miles per hour, hailing from the hills of Wisconsin and the Gravity Group Gym, it is Hades 360! Let the fight begin! So for people wondering, my number 15 coasters is Hades 360, and that's at Mount Olympus in Wisconsin.
And my top 15, or number 15 is the Dueling Dragons, which is a set of coasters, dueling coasters, that were at Universal Orlando Islands Adventure, that is now a defunct coaster and no longer there.
So, Dueling Dragons was a coaster that I've never gotten to ride. My question for you is, did you ride it while it was still dueling?
I did, yes. I rode this all the way back when it was actually still Dueling Dragons, because eventually the Wizarding World of Harry Potter kind of took over that side of the park, and it was actually renamed the Dragon Challenge, and they even redid all of the theming in the castle section of the ride, and so I rode this way back when it was still Dueling Dragons. So
yeah, so that would have been what, 2009 when we were down there, I think, at Universal. I was 8 years old at the time, so I wasn't tall enough to ride it. Well, I didn't get to experience a lot of the coasters there. So I was just curious if you rode it while it was still dueling or not. But yeah, if it was back in 2009, you're right. It was actually still dueling dragons at that point. So, but these roller coasters are about as far apart from each other as you can get. One is, a glass smooth B&M invert, and the other one is one of the roughest coasters on the planet. So, yeah, they're two different rides. Do you have a favorite side? Did you prefer the red side or the blue side?
So at the time when I was younger, I didn't like corkscrews as much because they rattled my head around. So I actually like the blue side better because the red side has a set of corkscrews that literally corkscrews goes in a straight piece of track and goes into another corkscrew, and I didn't like that as a kid. So I actually like the blue side better.
And that's kind of an uncommon testament, I believe. I don't know how much research you've done, but most people say the red side was a little bit better, and that's because the red side had a taller drop, so it got a little bit faster. And the 60 mile per hour stat they have for both sides isn't exactly true because the red side's drop is bigger. I do know that for sure.
Yep, so the red side's drop was 115 feet, blue drop was 95 feet, so red reached 60 miles per hour, blue really only reached 55 miles per hour.
Well, we can switch gears here a little bit and we can talk about my coasters. So this is one we've both ridden. It's Hades 360 at Mount Olympus, and I'm sure, as you remember, Mount Olympus is one of the sketchiest amusement parks in the country. Like, it is sketchy. Like, it's the type of amusement park that probably pays off the inspector every year, just so they can stay open and stuff. We always joked about that.
It's crazy. Well, and then my question for you is, did you get to ride Hades 360 while it was still Hades, and then while it was 360 as well?
Yes, I got to experience it before and after the retrack and the redesigned island and stuff. I did get to ride both experiences, and a lot of people complain that this is a rough roller coaster, but I hate to break it to you, but it was rough even before the retrack. So
that's almost a staple of the ride. It's like you can ride that. It is re-rideable, but it's like you ride it once and you gotta take a break. That's what those go-kart tracks are for, or the other coasters. You go ride that stuff, and then in a couple hours you can come back and maybe ride it again, because it just rattles you around so much.
Absolutely. And that's probably one of the similarities between these two roller coasters is they're both intense rides. They're not weak, they're not slow, they're both intense, forceful roller coasters. And that's probably why they're a good comparison, I think.
I forget, I looked it up and I don't have it written down what the actual G's of each coaster was, but it's like this Hades 360 pulls it was 3.6 or 4 G's, and then Dueling Dragons was a tiny bit more at it was 0.2 different. So it was if Hades was 3.6, then Dueling Dragons was 3.8. I don't have the exact number, but they were really close in the G's that they pulled, and Dueling Dragons was just a tiny bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And these two roller coasters, you get a really rough ride that has no inversions, or you get a really smooth ride that has multiple inversions. And, even though they are intense, they are completely different ride experiences. And, depending on the type of roller coaster that you prefer and your age group, and maybe, how much roughness you can actually endure on a roller coaster, might sway this one way or the other for you, just because they are completely different ride experiences. That's the one thing about roller coasters. They're all different, and they're all, each experience is different. So depending on your opinion on what you like better, you might like a roller coaster better.
Yes. So, obviously, the biggest demerit with Dueling Dragons is the fact that it is a defunct coaster and you can't ride it anymore, which is really sad. At the time, one of the biggest things with this is being a B&M invert. I mean, from a line standpoint and stuff like that, it was a capacity machine. I mean, you had 8 rows of 4, means 32 guests per train, but then you had one queue line that eventually then split off into the 2 coasters. So you technically had 2 roller coasters with one queue line, meant that you could this thing ate through lines. It was absolute insanity. This thing could run. I think it had like a 3,000 plus capacity with the combined queue line, and that's just crazy. That line must have moved so fast.
Yeah, and comparing that to Hades 360, on the other hand, as you know, that roller coaster sucks because if you go to the park on a quiet day or a slow day, they only launch Hades 360 with full trains. They will not let it out of the station without a full train. So you could be sitting there waiting for 4, 5, sometimes 6 minutes for them to fill the train up before it dispatches.
Yeah.
And then on the days where it's really, really busy, then you're stuck in line. So no matter what, when you go ride this roller coaster, you're at least waiting, 5 or 6 minutes for it.
Yeah. And then on top of that, if you happen to go on a slow day and they can't get full trains to go, they won't even open the coaster. It'll be closed. So it's one of those things where for a bunch of rides, but then it might not be open. Or like you said, you go on a busy day, sure, it'll be open, but you're going to be waiting in line for it. So
Exactly. My biggest complaint about where Hades 360 is, though, is the damn hill that you have to walk up after you're done riding the thing. It's built at the bottom of the hills. Not many people know this, but when you go to a certain portion of Wisconsin, it's actually hilly. It's not flat anymore. And that's kind of where this amusement park is built. And for, a person that's, not necessarily the greatest shape, you gotta walk up that big ass hill to go back to the parking lot after you're done riding the thing. It's like you're worn out just riding it, and then you gotta walk back up the hill at the end. It's like, oh no.
Yeah, that is... See, and this is where Dueling Dragons would really strive is they had a really cool, basically an entire set piece for the queue line. Like, you walked into an actual castle that they built for this thing. So it was even just exciting getting to the queue line. I mean, at the beginning of the queue, when it was still Dueling Dragons, they had 2 gigantic dragon statues that were snarling at each other that you had to walk between. And one of them had a light-up crystal, and the other one had an actual like, fire element that night that lit up. So it was like... It's so cool just getting in line for this coaster that
these two roller coasters, not only are they a tale of 2 completely different ride experiences, they're a tale of 2 completely different amusement parks. On the one hand, you have Universal, which is a top tier theme park, and they invest millions, maybe even $1 billion a year into an amusement park down there in Orlando. And then you have Mount Olympus in the middle of nowhere. In the state of Wisconsin, it's a park that some people haven't even heard of, and they're scratching together dollars and pocket change trying to keep the park running, because if they charged anymore, no one would go to it. So it's almost a tale of 2 different amusement parks completely. On one spectrum, you have the big multi-billion-dollar business, and on the other, you have this little privately owned amusement park in the middle of nowhere that some people haven't heard of. So that's another thing you can think about when looking at these roller coasters.
And on top of that, so Dueling Dragons was released or opened in 1999 when Universal Studios Island Adventure itself opened. So this was one of their premier attractions. It was highly marketed. Like, it was one of the things that, like, you have to come and ride this ride. They publicized it or advertised it so much to try and, as like I said, one of their premier attractions. So they put a lot of time and money into it for that as well. So like you said, there was a whole lot more production and time that went into this. Like, I found out that they had a creative director / actor for that.
Oh, absolutely. And they just invested more money into it. I guess at this point, do you have the elements that were incorporated onto the Dueling Dragons? Do you have that on you?
Yeah, so we'll start with the red side, and that obviously starts with a chain lift into the drop, which was 115 feet, and that goes into the first of what's called an Immelman loop. And Immelman loops, I actually had to look up because I didn't know what they were, but from what I understand, it's kind of a half loop into a corkscrew. It's not like a full regular vertical loop. It's kind of hard to...
Yeah, catch you for a second. So an implement is the opposite of a dive loop. So a dive loop, what happens is you come up to the top of the hill, and you roll over, and then you dive towards the ground. Where an implement is the opposite of that. You go through the loop portion, and then when you get to the top of the loop, you go through like either a barrel roll or a twist, and it flips you back over, and then you head back towards the ground. So that's what an implement would be.
Okay. So then after this, you head into Airtime Hill, which I would like to point out is actually sort of a rarity on B&M inverts specifically. So that was a nice little touch, where you go into another Immelman, which was more intense than the first, into a vertical loop, into back-to-back corkscrews, and then come back into the station. So I just from reading this list, so let's compare it to the blue side. You have a chain lift into the drop, which was only, I forget how much did I say? It was 95 feet instead of 150 feet. And then you have an overbanked curve into a 0G roll, into a cobra roll, into a vertical loop, into a final corkscrew. And just from, going through these two lists, you can just, from the elements, you can already tell that, like we said before, red is a much more intense side, where blue is a little bit less intense. You have that 0G roll instead of double corkscrews. You have a cobra roll and a vertical loop instead of those Immelmans. But they're both very well worth riding, and the dueling aspect really adds here. So the dueling aspect, I forget where they meet. They meet 3 times.
The most famous one is the two loops, the two vertical loops, I believe. That's the one that you see on. That's the one you see on video all the time, or when you see pictures of this roller coaster.
I was gonna say, if you look up any picture, if you just Google in Dueling Dragons, the first in the 10 pictures, 5 of them will be of the vertical loop meet of these two trains. I believe on the blue side that 0G roll goes over the red track, and then the corkscrews intertwine at one point as well. So I think those are on it. So.
I can definitely talk a lot about why this roller coaster no longer exists. I've done a lot of research on that part of it. So basically, the story that I have, kind of cobbled together over multiple people is that, so basically what happens is they rebranded this as the Dragon Challenge. That's when Harry Potter started moving into this area of the park. But what eventually happened is as cell phones got heavier, and cell phones got bigger, during the dueling aspects of these roller coasters, stuff started flying off the trains and hitting the riders on the other train. So, for a safety reason, Universal basically said, we can't run this as a dueling coaster anymore. And that took a lot of the thrill.
Yeah, as a side note, they tried installing metal detectors for a little while, and that didn't help the situation at all. So yeah, they decided to do away with the dueling aspect.
Yeah, so they got rid of the dueling aspect, and at this point it's a 15-year-old coaster, so it probably wasn't as smooth as when it first opened. It wasn't as more inverts have been built since these two roller coasters, so they weren't even considered top tier inverts anymore. Just because they lost the dueling aspect. That was probably about, 40% of the roller coaster was the dueling aspect. That's why you rode it.
Absolutely. When it was built, it was one of the only dueling inverts out there, and that really was the magic of this ride. Those near misses of the trains were just, absolutely crazy. You'd never come that close to any other trains on other coasters.
Exactly. So, after they lost the dueling aspect, ridership fell, and then obviously the age of the roller coaster, maintenance costs and everything, they finally decided to shut it down and tear it out. And now, today, in that plot of land stands Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure. That's the new Harry Potter roller coaster from Intamin that they put in there. And that's now what's on that plot of land. But, once this roller coaster lost its dueling aspects, especially in the newer day and age, it was no longer a top-tier roller coaster, and it just lost ridership to the point where it was no longer worth keeping open.
Well, and in addition to that, when they transitioned into the Harry Potter section of the park, they also, like I said, they redid the queue line. of the ride, and they did fashion it towards Harry Potter. They did theme it towards the Tournament of Wizards, I believe it's called. And unfortunately, in that aspect, they lost a lot of story that came with the ride.
It didn't fit.
No, it didn't fit. That's the perfect word, because that was also another part of it too, is that customers and even like some of the actors that like took place in the Harry Potter movies complained about how it didn't quite fit in with the Wizarding Harry Potter world. And I'm like, I do understand that. It was these two big red and blue tracks that kind of stuck out over the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, and they really didn't fit in. They tried to rebrand it to keep it in, but after it lost that dueling aspect, it didn't belong anymore. So it was really in their best interest to get rid of the ride, unfortunately. So
yeah, absolutely. For the last aspect, or the last kind of talking about this roller coaster, are there any coasters that you can compare it to that you've ridden? Is there anything similar or something that could really give you an idea of what this ride experience was? Do you have any coasters picked out that would be close to it, or what, that you would compare to it?
The original Batman is the closest in my mind. But I can't really think of any like racing or dueling coasters that would really honestly come close to this ride. Just that inversion aspect added such a unique element to this ride that it's like, unless they built another dueling invert, or there is one that I don't know about, another B&M invert would probably be your closest bet, and I would probably say Batman, just because it's a really intense ride. Batman is, so.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, just looking at the layouts of these two roller coasters. What year was this roller coaster built? I don't remember off the top of my head. Oh, 2005. So, they kind of...
1999.
Oh, yeah, you're right, 1999. So, if you kind of compare that to the Batman ride, I believe that was 96, somewhere in there. So the Batman ride actually came first. That was the first invert, but this didn't come super far after that. This was their first really custom layout, because after the Batman ride, they just started building Batman clones. So that's all you could find for the inverts. And then finally they came out with these two roller coasters that were both custom layouts. But that's why...
Sorry, Batman was 1992.
1992, I was close. But yeah, so those two roller coasters are close together in age group and design ideas. So that's probably you're probably correct there. That's your closest comparison. But yeah, the other racing coasters out there that just come off the top of my head, you have American Eagle, but that's a wooden roller coaster, no inversions. You have Gemini, that's a hybrid aero coaster, but again, no inversions. So yeah, this is the really unique ride experience, and for the people that can say they've been on it, it's not a roller coaster that a lot of people that haven't ridden it can say they've experienced something similar. I think that wraps up the Dueling Dragons quite well. If you're ready to shift gears over to Hades 360 now, or
yes, let's go.
All right, so Hades 360 is a Gravity Group coaster. It was actually one of their first coasters they built. And I believe it originally featured the PTC trains. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Yeah, and that's what's featured in this park. So at Mount Olympus, it's all wooden roller coasters. There's not a single steel one, and they're built by different companies. But
I was just gonna say, for as low budget a park they are, that's actually really unique. I don't really think there's most anywhere else that can say they just have wooden coasters.
No, the only other place that would be a similar experience would be Holiday World down in Indiana, but they still have Thunderbird, which is a steel B&M coaster. But for the most part, they have 3 wooden roller coasters as well there. But at Mount Olympus, you have Zeus, you have Cyclops, Pegasus, and Hades. And so when Hades first opened, it had the PTC trains, and it was rough. It was extremely rough. The one thing I will say about the conversion to the Hades 360 that we know it as today, is they got the Timberliner trains. They got the new trains. I don't know if you remember when they did switch the trains, but they're brand new Timberliner trains from Gravity Group, and they feature a lot more comfy restraint, I think, than the PTC trains do. So that was one bonus. That was a bonus from the conversion.
That's kind of a staple, I feel like, of wooden coasters. Like, I just recently went back and rewrote American Eagle, and I realized how sort of uncomfortable those restraints are. As fun as that ride is, but that's always just a small negative on the PTC trains, is that they're not the most... When you're a little kid, you don't care, but once you become an adult and you're starting to enjoy these bigger rides, it becomes uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. And for listeners who don't know what a PTC train is, PTC is the train, or is the roller coaster company. They built roller coasters back in the 70s. They don't do it anymore, but they still design trains. And if you look at a running roller coaster at any amusement park and it has the really square, boxy-looking trains with the bright orange kind of like lap bar restraint thing that comes down, that is a PTC train. So I'm sure, as a listener, if you're not an avid roller coaster enthusiast, you have seen these trains somewhere else, and you probably know that they're not extremely comfortable. Especially on a coaster that has a lot of airtime. They're very uncomfortable. And that's just how it is. But the new Timberliner trains that Gravity Group brought in and designed themselves are a lot comfier than those old PTC trains. One thing about Hades 360 is that it is rough. That's something that we have to make sure everybody is aware of. And I'm sure you know that just as well as I do.
Oh, yeah. The smoothest part of that coaster nowadays is the inversion. And then after that, I mean, even with those new trains, it is not any better. It's, unfortunately, as it goes, it's just going to keep getting worse. So.
Yeah, well, some of it has to do with lack of maintenance. I can't lie. It's at Mount Olympus, the cheapest park in the country, I have to say. And some of it has to do with ride maintenance, but some of it's just the harsh Wisconsin winters it's got to go through. We get down into the negative degree temperatures, and it can stay there for a week at a time. And I think that really, really deteriorates that wood and the track and everything. That's probably part of why it's pretty rough.
But compared to
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Of the ride, because I mean, to put it in perspective for listeners, this Hades 360 reaches speeds of 70 miles per hour, which is 10 miles faster than Dueling Dragons, and it has over 4,000 feet of track, 4,746 to be exact, while Dueling Dragons has only about 3,200 feet of track. But Hades 360 does that extra 1,700 feet of track in 10 seconds less force that this ride has.
Well, and that's the one thing that I will give Hades 360 over the Dueling Dragons is pacing. This roller coaster is a non-stop experience from start to finish, and it's as soon as you leave the station. Like, you don't have to even go up the lift hill to start going through the ride experience.
I was just about to ask if we could talk about the beginning section, because that is one thing I would give it. It has one of the best pre-lift sections on a roller coaster ever, and one of it has to do with how high the station is, because you got a pretty good little hill out of the station.
Yeah, that bringing in the whole Mount Olympus thing, for some reason, I cannot explain why, they like to build their stations 35, 40 feet in the air. And there's no reason for it. Like especially Hades 360, there's absolutely no reason for the station to be 40 feet in the air. So when you go to this park, be ready to climb stairs, because every station in the park is probably 30 feet in the air on average. Even Pegasus is 30 feet in the air. And I don't
use sets of stairs just to get to the freaking station.
Yeah, so in Hades 360's aspect, it's probably the tallest station at the park. So it's probably more like 40 or 45 feet in the air. So as soon as you dispatch from the station, you go off a 45-foot drop, and you go through a pre-lift section that's probably close to 500 or 600 feet of track. And you'll go through some of the best airtime experiences before you even go up the lift hill. Some of the best airtime on the coaster is before the lift hill.
A little S-hill after a couple different elements, and like I said, if you're sitting in that back row, you get an awesome pop of ejector airtime before you've even hit the dang lift hill.
Absolutely. And then once you go up the lift hill, that's when it drops into the parking lot. And because of the tunnel restraints, You don't get the sustained airtime that you do with the pre-lift section. It's more like pops of airtime, pops of ejector. But some of that was just, size restraint. They didn't have a lot of room for roller coaster track. But this roller coaster features over what? Is it like 1,600 feet of underground track? So almost half this roller coaster is underground.
At the time that it was built, it had the longest underground tunnel on a wooden roller coaster anywhere. And so it's an 800-foot tunnel, but what it is you go through it one way into the parking lot, into the little island that has the inversions, and then you come back, you go over an airtime hill, back into the tunnels, which again is an 800-foot tunnel. The two separate sides of track run right next to each other. So yeah, it's a cumulative 1,600 feet of track just underground in the darkness, no lights. Even during the daytime, it is pitch black down there. You can't even see where you're going.
Oh, absolutely. So kind of diving into this roller coaster layout, let's just kind of talk about that for a minute. So you start off, you drop out of the station, like I was saying, and you pick up some really good speed on that first drop out of the station. You go through some twists and turns, some left and right, a couple of airtime hills, and then you pop up into the lift hill. And then you start creeping up the lift hill, and as the higher you get, the more of a view you can get of the parking lot. But one thing that people kind of don't realize is this lift hill is longer than the 30 feet in the air that it goes, because it's actually going up a hill. So you have to go up the hill, and then you have to go up 130 feet in the air. So it's like a 200-foot lift hill, even though the coaster is only like 135 feet tall. And then that's where you go down the first drop. And I don't know about you, but this is one of the better first drops on a roller coaster out there. Because not only is it a steep drop, but you also drop right into that tunnel. So you go from daylight to pitch black. And you can't see because your eyes are all used to daylight. So your eyes are like, you can see spots in your eyes, because and then you drop into that tunnel. And then you bounce around in the tunnel. And the tunnel actually it's a left-hand turn. So as you're heading out to the island, you actually go through a turn in the tunnel.
I do want to point out about that turn in the 8-foot tunnel. It is a 90-degree banked turn, and that was before it became 360. So, that was there the whole time.
Yes. And it's an intense turn. That whole tunnel is intense. Just because not only is it the visual aspect that you can't see, but it is loud. It is eardrum rattling, loud sounds as you're rattling through this tunnel. If anybody's experienced a wooden roller coaster, they know they're loud roller coasters. It's a simple fact. So, and because it's loud and confined in a tunnel where it's echoey, it makes it even worse. So not only are you disoriented visually, but you're also disoriented hearing-wise.
Yeah, if you think about it, it almost is assaulting as many senses as it can, because you cannot see, so it's affecting your sight. You can't hear anything because it is so freaking loud in there. And then on top of that, because you can't see, you can't really brace for this turn and the little hills and stuff. So it's also kind of just throwing you around in the pitch dark. It's an intense part of the ride.
Oh, absolutely. And then you pop right up into the corkscrew. You have about a half a second of daylight before you're upside down. So now you're really disoriented because you're upside down, and you go through the corkscrew, and then you go through, is it an overbanked turn?
It's a 110-degree banked turn.
Yeah, so it's an overbanked turn, and then you pop up into that airtime hill like you were talking about, and then you go through the tunnel and you do it all over again. And then the cool part about this roller coaster is the parking lot and where the tunnel is on a grade above the station. So you think that you've gone through this tunnel twice now, and you think the ride is done, but it's not, because you're still, 50 or 60 feet above the station because of the hill?
Yep.
So this ride really carries its speed into the second half, which is pretty much all twister. It's pretty much just left and bank turns and a lot of G-forces and stuff, but there's some airtime moments too before hitting the final brakes. So this roller coaster carries its speed very, very well, and that's where it gets its amazing pacing from.
Well, in that back half after you go through the parking lot, I also feel like it's a little bit of a terrain coaster too, because it's all wooded and stuff back there, so you're also kind of just flying, and you're not near like any of the other theme park part of the stuff. So you're just flying through the woods, going through these banked turns, and like you said, it carries that speed, so you're not going slow through this section either. And it whips you through this, and then finally back up into the station, or down into the station actually. Small little hill back into.
Absolutely, this roller coaster, it carries its speed. They use the terrain really well, like you were saying. They use the hill to their advantage. And one thing that Gravity Group is famous for, and this is a roller coaster me and you have not ridden, either of us have, and that is the Voyage at Holiday World, which is a world record-breaking roller coaster, as well as it's won so many awards, like it's been voted best roller coaster, best wooden roller coaster in the U.S. and stuff like that. And that's a Gravity Group ride. So this is really similar to that. They were able to use the terrain to their advantage and engineer the roller coaster to continue to carry its speed, even though it is 4,000 feet long. All right, so it is now time to really kind of wrap up our opinions here and kind of pick and choose what we think is the better ride. Do you want to go first then?
Yeah, so with Dueling Dragons, like, I really think the crowning feature of this is just how it's an overall experience. It's not just riding the coaster. It's that queue line with all of those set pieces and stuff. Something I didn't mention before was that it even has a whole show on these moving stained glass. They're TV screens, but it's moving stained glass that tells the story of these two dragons that are dueling, and then you have to go through this whole queue line, and then you get to pick your dragon, and then you actually go into this ride and dueling. I guess the only cons with this really is that it is a defunct coaster and you can't ride it anymore, but other than that, I really don't have any complaints about this ride specifically. And as an overall experience, like I said, I think that's where it maybe shines just a little bit better than Hades 360.
So you're picking Dueling Dragons, is that correct?
As of right now, I'm picking, it's such a hard thing for me because I'm just going to say this, Hades 360 is actually technically further up on my top 15 list. So it's so hard, but I really do, I think the only thing that puts this lower on my list, honestly, is the fact that it is a defunct coaster. I am really into the theming of rides, and it makes me love a coaster. So, like, even though it might not technically be the better coaster, I personally love it more than Hades 360. So I think, yes, I will stick with my Dueling Dragons on this one.
All right. I'm actually going to agree with you, believe it or not, even though Hades is my number 15. Here's the thing, and from my perspective with the Dueling Dragons, is I was at the park, so I didn't get to ride it, but I was there. I got to watch this roller coaster duel. I got to see it in person, and I didn't get to experience it. So for me, it's the allure of a roller coaster that I got to see in person, couldn't ride, couldn't get the credit, and now it no longer exists. I can never go back, and I can never, regain that moment of hoping and wanting to ride that roller coaster as bad as I did. So for me, the allure of it not existing anymore makes it almost a better ride. This is a roller coaster in the enthusiast community that everybody either has ridden it or has wanted to ride it. And for that reason alone, I think it is a little bit better. And it's the dueling aspect with the inversions that you cannot get anywhere else really in the world anymore. Hades 360 is a great ride, but it has its issues. It has the fact that it's in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. It has the fact that it's super, super rough. And for people who like rough, out-of-control experiences, Hades 360 is for you. But for me, the fact that I never got to ride Dueling Dragons really makes it, one of those coasters that sticks in my mind. And I think about it all the time, like, man, I just wish I could get one ride on this roller coaster to say I was on it. So for me, I would also pick Dueling Dragons in this battle. This is our steel versus wood battle. We're gonna have some more like this in the future, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm taking Dueling Dragons, I think.
Woohoo! I I won one! Yay!
No, it's one of those coasters I never got to ride, so it's on my list as a great coaster, and it's hard for me to argue against that. So.
Hades 360 might honestly be, like I hear this all the time, especially when I was doing research for this, was that if it was retracked, it would be bumped higher on a lot of people's lists because it wouldn't be as rough. But like you said, being at Mount Olympus, it's really hard to see that in the future of this coaster, unless something serious happens. It's probably not gonna happen anytime soon.
So this has been Coaster Wars, and today the champion was Dueling Dragons.
So for our next coaster battle, looks like we're going to have... Oh, this is going to be the Battle of the Launch Coasters. That'll be our next podcast. Kind of a... I think that the actual title is going to be David versus Goliath, just because of the two coasters that we're comparing. So, but yeah. That is...
What our 14th coasters were. Okay.
Yeah, it is a very David versus Goliath battle. I think that's the perfect title for it. So that's going to be our next Coaster Wars battle. So
good. We'll see everybody next week.